come on up front. You won't be on.
I've been up front enough lately. I'm happy to sit back.
Sure. All right. We'll go ahead and.
Hold on, Daniel.
Nope, we won't get started.
I think the power outage killed our remote. Give it just a sec.
Sure. Just let us know, Jim.
You're good.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out, and hope everyone did well during the storm. Hopefully it wasn't too impactful for everyone here. Just before we get started, just to introduce myself, I'm Daniel Ainsley, the Finance Director.
And I am Mike Dugan, and I oversee the tax increment financing for the city.
And a lot of other things. Mike does a ton of stuff. But we're just going to go over briefly property taxes, sales taxes, why those are important within Rapid City, and then also how tax increment financing works in Rapid City. And then if there's questions, comments, that sort of thing, we'll just ask that you would wait until the end of the presentation. And then if you have those, we would ask that you would go to the podium up here, because this is being streamed. And so in order for the people that are watching at home to be able to hear it, you need to be at the microphone over there. Okay? So to begin with, property taxes in Rapid City. Just to let everyone know, this pie chart here is for owner-occupied housing. When you look at your home, if it's an owner-occupied housing, almost half, 48%, of your property tax goes to the school district. The county then gets 28%, the city 19%, and other taxing entities get 5% of it. What would happen if it's non-owner occupied? So if it's industrial, if it's commercial, if it's a rental property, what happens then? Your actual tax bill is a bit higher, because the state has passed, the state essentially provides some property tax relief to owner-occupied housing. So if it's anything other than owner-occupied housing, this number here, 48%, grows. It's actually probably going to be about 55, 57%. And then the county, the city, and the other end up dropping. And so the total tax bill ends up being a bit higher. And something that I bring up quite often to our council, and I think it's important for the public to be aware, is that when you look at municipal tax rates, these are the municipal mill levies that were paid in 2023. The reason we chose 23 is because that's the last year that the state has made available statewide. And so in a couple of months, we'll be able to tell you what 24s are. I can't tell you that yet because we don't have the data. But for 23, when you look, of the major cities in South Dakota, Rapid City is the next to the lowest. So Brookings is a bit lower than Rapid City. If you look, we're about 30% lower than Sioux Falls. So if you had the same assessed home in Sioux Falls as what it is here in Rapid City, your taxes would be about your city taxes would be about 30% more. That does mean that we rely more on other income streams. We rely on those other income streams far more in Rapid City than what other communities do. The reason Brookings ends up being even lower than Rapid City is that not only do they have a healthy sales tax, but Brookings also owns their municipal liquor store. And so all the bars and all of the convenience stores and all the restaurants in town, they actually have to purchase all of their beverages from the city of Brookings. And so there's a profit that comes from that, and they're able to use that profit margin to pay down their cost to government. And so that keeps property taxes lower. When you look at Rapid City, this is for our 2026 budget. The city of Rapid City is like most cities in America, as well as the state, as well as the school district. We have several different funds. What that means is we can't use money that's in one fund to pay a bill from another fund. And so the most important is what's called the general fund. That's about a third of our total budget. It's just over $100 million next year. That general fund is used to cover most of our ongoing operational costs, so kind of the day-to-day costs. That's for police, fire, parks, street maintenance. So when we do snow, when we do limb pickup, like we're doing today, when we fix traffic signals that we're doing today, all of that sort of stuff is paid for out of our general fund, along with library, community development, finance, HR, and attorney. What's interesting is when you look at our revenue, the biggest source of revenue into our general fund, 40%, is sales tax. Other communities, that percentage is far lower. It's actually quite common that our number 2 revenue stream, which is property tax at 24%, a lot of large communities in the state, it's actually flipped. That property tax would be closer to 40% and sales tax would be closer to 24%. Not exactly, not mirror, but still the property tax would be 35%, say, of their total revenue, and sales tax would be closer to about 25% of their total revenue. So we are very blessed to have a very robust commercial sector here in Rapid City that keeps our property taxes lower. No, everyone, including myself, I think my property taxes are far too high. But the reality is they would be even higher if we didn't have as strong of a sales tax as what we have. Our third leading funder of our general fund is interest. So our interest revenue is actually 8% of our total revenue into the general fund. A very important component. Then after that, it comes down to permits, grants, charges for services, different things like that. Sales tax in Rapid City. So when you purchase something for Christmas, say you go to downtown, you go somewhere and buy something, you end up paying a 6.2% sales tax. Of that 6.2% sales tax, the state receives 69% of that. So they get 4.2% of that 6.2%. The city receives 2%, the state gets 4.2%. That 4.2 compared to 6.2 comes out to 69%. Of the 2% sales tax that the city receives, half of it goes to the general fund. So if you spend $100, you're going to pay $6.20 in sales tax. The city's general fund will get $1. That $1 is what pays for police, fire, road maintenance, all those things we talked about. And then a little over half of the remainder goes to our capital improvement fund, and then about 42% goes to our to our vision fund. So the capital improvement fund is what pays for major road reconstruction. It goes to pay for parks rehabilitations and also for new structures that the city builds. So new park structures and new fire stations, new police stations, all that sort of stuff. And then the vision fund, I think everyone knows about that. We had a lot of discussions about that 18 months ago when there were some changes made to that. So when people, we often hear residents saying that they want more road projects going on, or they want, better bridges, or they want better parks. The way that you fund that is for sales tax to go up. If sales tax does not increase, and I'm not talking the rate, we can never increase the rate. We are capped by the state legislature. So the only way we can get more money to do more capital projects is to increase sales tax. And that is one reason why it's so important, because sales tax is pretty much the primary funder of our capital improvement program, as well as our vision fund, and also it's the primary funder of our general fund. So we really need to worry as a community about how can we increase our sales tax. If we're not increasing our sales tax, then we're going to have to start looking at some of the other revenue streams, which is mostly property tax. When you buy something that's tourist related, that's hotels, that's alcohol, rental cars, different things like that, it's actually 7.2%. It's not 6.2%. The city receives an extra 1%. That 1%, 75% of that goes to the monument or the civic center, and then 25% goes to Visit Rapid City. Visit Rapid City uses those funds to help increase tourism in our community, because that, again, is such a big driver of revenue for us. So again, we are very blessed to have a very robust sales tax here in Rapid City. This looks at our per capita sales tax. Again, you can see that Rapid City has a much higher per capita sales tax than Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, Brookings, Mitchell, all of those communities. That helps subsidize our property taxes, keeping our municipal tax rate lower. If we don't have as high of a sales tax collection, we have to rely more on property taxes. And so then our property tax rate would start to mirror some of those other communities. And again, we all think and know that our property taxes are too high, but they're lower than other communities. So if we don't have that robust sales tax, we either have to drastically start cutting back government services, or we have to start relying more on property taxes. Per capita, we are higher than any other major city in the state. If you look at Keystone and Deadwood, per capita they're higher. Other than that, we're pretty much the highest in the state. However, and this chart here is really important, our sales tax per capita, once you adjust it for inflation, has not been keeping up with our growth. That's what this line right up here shows. And if you were to actually go back prior to 2017, the line is even worse. Why that has occurred is because you can look at communities like Spearfish and Gillette. Those communities continue to attract more and more retail. As those communities attract more and more retail, those residents shop less and less frequently here in Rapid City. Same with Box Elder. As Box Elder develops more retail, those residents don't have as many needs to come into Rapid City. Of course, they'll still come sometimes, but they won't come on a daily or weekly basis. This actually hit us even harder after the pandemic in 2020. At that point, a lot of people became a lot more accustomed to shopping online. As they began shopping online, a lot of the smaller communities saw their per capita sales tax really increase because all of a sudden they were starting to collect on all that online retail. However, if I'm living in Somerset and now I'm starting to do a lot of my Christmas shopping online, that has an impact on Rapid City. That's pretty negative. It's positive for Somerset, but it's negative for Rapid City. So again, that's why we have to worry as a community about increasing our sales tax collection. So moving on from that into tax increment financing. So a question that we've been receiving a lot over the past several months is, what's a TIF? What makes a TIF different than a TIF-D or a TID? Just so everyone knows, whenever you hear any of those three acronyms, they're all the exact same. And so that makes it really complex to say, how is a TID different than a TIF, whatever else. They're all the exact same thing. TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. TIF-D is Tax Increment Financing District. TID is Tax Increment District. They're literally the same thing, just so everyone knows. But essentially what tax increment financing is a tool that allows local governments to make improvements and further development within their community. It really is the only economic development tool that the state legislature has authorized cities to use, and cities as well as counties. And counties do use TIFs, just like Pennington County has used TIFs in the past. Actually, just this year, they did as well. So in other states, they have a lot of different tools. Here in South Dakota, we have one, and that's called a TIF. And what we use TIFs for is to capture brand new property tax revenue that's created within a TIF district, and we use that revenue to help offset some of the costs that are needed to make improvements to allow that development to occur. So the idea is that it provides an incentive to attract businesses or to help existing businesses to expand without tapping into the general fund or the CIP. And so if we don't use a TIF, the only other way that the city can help bridge a gap to bring in a new business into town that needs that assistance is from writing a check out of its general fund or to write a check out of its CIP fund, both of which would have negative consequences on our existing residents, because that would be less money for operations or less money for capital. And so a TIF is a way to allow a developer to recognize some of the new wealth that's being created, some of the brand new taxes that are being generated, to leverage that to actually bring that growth into the community. It also can be used to assist in affordable housing projects. We have been doing that a lot in the past 24, 36 months. In fact, there's more than 500 new affordable housing units that are either have been completed or currently under construction that have used tax increment financing. Some people say, why is that really necessary? One of the biggest drivers of our increases in property taxes is because our total assessed values have been increasing so much because there's a lot of people moving into our community. If the simple law of supply and demand says that if we increase the supply of housing, that's going to help steady the overall value of those homes. And so we are trying to increase the amount of affordable housing so that people that are in some entry-level jobs or people that are retired that don't have, an ability to really increase their income, they're able to stay in our community and they're not priced out. And so we have been successfully using TIFs to increase that supply of affordable housing in our community. Why sometimes is a TIF necessary? Sometimes the cost of making improvements make a project no longer fiscally feasible. And so when you look at the cost of constructing a development, maybe it would end up costing $50 million to build this development, but to bring the infrastructure and to make all the needed improvements, it becomes $60 million. Well, at $50 million, it's profitable enough for someone to actually build that project. But at $60 million, it's not really profitable, or it's marginally profitable. That's when a private entity says, if that's as profitable as it is, it makes more sense for us to make an investment somewhere else. Because we have to remember, at the end of the day, we are competing as a community with not just other communities inside the state, but we're competing against Colorado, we're competing against Wyoming, everywhere else. And so one example of that is Cabela's. That is a project that now generates millions of dollars in property tax and sales tax for our community and for our state. When they were looking at coming to the Black Hills, one of the significant players that was competing against Rapid City was Gillette. So Rapid City authorized a TIF to help offset some of the costs necessary to bring that in. In doing so, we received the new jobs and the new property tax revenue that we're getting, as well as the new sales tax revenue. If Gillette would have received Cabela's, then all of that would have gone to Gillette and Wyoming, and we wouldn't have had any of that. So it is, at times, it's used to help incentivize and make sure that we are able to attract some of those businesses that are needed so that we increase our sales tax or we increase the jobs that are needed for our community. I'm sorry, this is your turn now, right?
So kind of getting into more the specifics of the projects that TIF is eligible for. Before I get into this, I do want to make a quick note. So when you talk about TIFs are handled differently in different states. They're regulated different. There's different laws in TIFs. So a TIF may have failed in Chicago for whatever reason. Doesn't mean that type of stuff, happens, whatever happened there, doesn't happen here. So if there's national studies that kind of put all of them together, that's not really a true representation of how they're regulated in South Dakota, because they are regulated different. And I'll touch base on that a little bit when we get further. But examples of TIF projects or redevelopment of buildings, a recent example of that is the Marshall Heights Track project. I think more commonly known in the community as Chick-fil-A. That is taking a property, underperforming property on North La Crosse that was at one time a big shining example of hotels in Rapid City years ago, but it has underperformed over the last 10 years. So that is considered blight. So what that particular TIF is going to do, what the funds are for, is to remove that, demolish that property, remove it, and then add some much needed public infrastructure to that area of town. It can also clean up polluted areas such as an old gas station that has underground fuel tanks that may be, leaked, so it's contaminated. TIF can be used to clean up those sites. Providing infrastructure to develop a site for industrial or commercial use. So what that means is roads are very expensive, even like 900 linear feet, which doesn't sound like a lot, is multi-million-dollar project to put in a road, to put in the water, to put in the sewer. So it makes projects not as feasible for when people try to move into town or to expand their existing business because of the cost of infrastructure currently, and especially in today's prices and environment. So it can improve historic and downtown business districts, and then general public infrastructure improvements. So they can go towards extending streets or putting new roads in, and putting new sewer and water, or refurbishing existing ones that are maybe dated. So how does TIF work? So it works by freezing the property tax base in a TIF boundary. So what that means, let's just use for an example, a developer wants to develop one parcel. So just a square gets put around there, that's the TIF boundary. All the improvements that are to be made has to be within that TIF boundary to be deemed reimbursable. So I work with the Department of Revenue, who works with Pennington County. So if a TIF is approved by the Planning Commission and City Council, Department of Revenue and the county work together to certify a base value. What that means is what the property is worth at this day and time before any improvements are made. So with that base value, why that's so important, so let's just say that particular parcel, they're paying $10,000 a year in property taxes. That is the base value, so the city, the county, and the school district continue to get that base value, that $10,000, throughout the life of a district. And a district's life can be up to 20 years by state statute. So, but over the, Rapid City has been using TIFs since the early 80s. And so the TIFs that have dissolved in the past have an average lifespan of 11 years. So they take about half of what's allowable to pay back, which is great. So now on top of that is called the increment. So as improvements are made to that property each year, the Department of Revenue County reassess that property, and that property goes up and up and up. The city and the county continue to keep that $10,000, or that split up that going for the life of that TID district. But they do not collect, the city and county do not collect that increment. That increment gets put back into a special fund that reimburses for the costs that are identified that were approved in a project plan. But what makes the state of South Dakota a lot different than other states is the school districts do not lose out. I think there's some information going around that what about the school districts, the TIFs are hard on them. The school districts are always made whole by the state. There's a state aid formula. They are made whole throughout the life of a TIF. So the TIF fund repays the cost of improvements. So you have, by state law, you have 5 years to make all the improvements. The first 5 years, the developer goes in and makes their improvements. So these TIFs are very tracked, and they go through a certification process. So the developer, if once these are approved, their funds go up front. So that's not that these are approved and the city, if the TIF was approved for $1 million for improvements, the city's not writing $1 million check to the developer. The developer is taking the risk. Their funds go up front. Typically, they have to go out and obtain a bank loan. So they put their funds up front. The certification process, the developer says, hey, all of our improvements are done, they're in place, we want to start reimbursement. The developer provides the city all of the invoices, and they have to prove what they spent for reimbursement. And I work with multiple departments. I work with the city attorney's office, I work with planning, I work with engineering. We go through the certification process to make sure that everything identified in the project plan matches up with the invoices before it can start reimbursement. So these are heavily tracked and monitored on an annual basis. Even at the certification basis, I still track these, how much interest is accumulated, which I'll get to, I think, here in the next slide. But once again, it's important to note there's a statewide or a state aid formula. The schools are always made whole through this, that the schools are not losing out on any of their funding throughout the TIF process. So, as I stated previously, they must obtain outside financing the developer. So typically a bank, a developer will go get a bank loan. The city requires that they provide us the terms because the city takes kind of a step further when looking at on the bank financing. So the rule of law is the state codified law that the city has to follow. The city does also, the city council has recently approved in a change earlier this year, its own internal TIF policy. We have to follow foremost what the state requires, but there's certain areas that the city is actually more stricter than the state. One of them is the interest. So we actually cap the interest rates that the bank can charge, or what a developer is reimbursable for, which is prime plus 3/4. So today, the Wall Street Journal prime is 6 3/4. So the max reimbursable on interest is 7.5%. So it's perfectly fine if a bank charges somebody 8%, but the city will only reimburse up to that 7.5%. That difference of a half a point is out of the developer's pocket. So we do take it a step further in some areas in our TIF policy. So it goes through that certification process. Once the project is complete, the city ensures it has to accept the work. We go through all those invoices. If they submit invoices, if it's $1 million approved, and they submit invoices for $1.2 million for work done, it's only up to that $1 million that's reimbursable, and that is tracked. It's monitored throughout the entire improvement process. So another important point too is what happens if a TIF district doesn't generate enough increment income that let's say it reaches year 20, which is the max amount of time it's allowed. What happens then? So a misconception is, well, the city is responsible for that loss, which means the taxpayers are. We got to make it up through increasing property taxes. That's false. So when the developer, let's just say there's $100,000 left at year 20, by state statute, we have to dissolve that TIF. There's no more increment coming in. That loss and increment is between the developer and the bank. That is not the city's responsibility to make up that difference. That cost or that loss is not made up by property tax payers and the city of Rapid City. That is solely on the developer. So how this works is, this bottom here, I guess is kind of a blue-green. That's the base value. So what that is the property value prior to investment. So that means as the property sits vacant land today before improvements are made. So once again, if that's $10,000 a year that the developer is paying on property taxes, the city, the county, and the school district continue to collect those taxes throughout the life of the TIF. What you're seeing here in the green, that's the increment. So as the developer's making improvements throughout the life of this TIF, it's increasing the value of that district boundary. So the property value is going up and up. That's the increment above the $10,000. So let's just say in year 2, they're paying $15,000. That $5,000 is the increment that goes towards reimbursing to paying off the bank loan. So once again, the important part is, and I'm sorry I keep mentioning this, but school district is not losing out. So that the school district is always made whole throughout the process by a statewide formula. So what you're seeing here at the end is the value after dissolution. The project is done. The reimbursement has happened. They paid the bank loan off, let's say in year 10. We dissolve it. So all of these property taxes here are now going to the city, the county, and the school district, so all the taxing levies. So the importance of tax increment financing is the but-for test, that would this have happened without tax increment financing? And there's some recent examples this year that the Planning Commission and City Council had turned down 2 district requests. Those developers decided we had absolutely had this to go forward. Those projects never happened. So what you're looking at with the use of tax increment financing, if that didn't happen, let's just say they're not approved, the property may sit like this for the next 100 years, undeveloped, which the city's losing out on that property tax, that sales tax. It could have been affordable housing. It could have been job creation. So with the use of tax increment financing, the city's now got those jobs, got that affordable housing, got that property tax, got that sales tax coming into the city. So project plan requirements, this is set forth by the state. These are the components that need to go into a project plan. And the project plan is very important. The Planning Commission, the City Council have to approve that district boundary, what parcels can be included in the improvement in the project plan. So what needs to go on the project plan, the public works and other improvements. That's what roads are you building? What roads are you extending? You know, what infrastructure are you putting in place? What are you upgrading, the water and the sewer? Economic feasible study, they have to show that this generates enough increment to pay back their bank loan, you know, within the 20 years. All the project costs that they want to be reimbursable for has to be included in this project plan. Let's just say that they want reimbursed for $10,000 of concrete for a sidewalk. If that wasn't identified, they submit that invoice. If that wasn't identified in the project plan, that's not eligible. That can't be included for repayment. So the fiscal impact statement, what kind of sales tax is that generating? What kind of property tax is that generated? The financing method, so we do track in here what the interest rate is. And we monitor that on an annual basis. And if interest rates drop in our internal TIF policy, we can require the developer to refinance that loan, that bank loan, at a lower rate. So this will even pay back quicker and get back on the tax roll that much quicker. This guarantee of affordability, that's where another place where the city takes it a little step farther over a little more strict. We put in our project plans and then our developer's agreement. The developer's agreement sets the terms, the responsibilities between the developer and the city. We guarantee affordability for the affordable housing projects. So for single family housing, for example, the state sets that by what is affordable housing. It's the first time home buyer's max purchase price, which is currently, it changes up and down each year, but it's currently $410,000 is the max purchase price a developer can sell their house for to maintain that affordable classification. And so we do monitor those. We monitor it by house sales. So if the developer is going to put up 100 single-family homes under that first-time home buyer's purchase price, we monitor each sale to make sure it stays in compliance with that guarantee of affordability. And we do have covenants in our developers' agreements. If they're out of compliance, there's strict penalties. We can freeze the increment. We can stop the increment. We can make the developer come up with money up front. So this is all tracked on an annual basis and by a home sale basis. So also within these, that's required by the state is a vicinity map, what those boundaries are, an aerial photo, a map of the existing zoning, existing land use, and the map of those public and other improvements. So I send these project plans up to the Department of Revenue if and when they're approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council, and they review them to make sure everything in there is complete and accurate and true before they accept it, and they work with the county to accept that value. So tax increment financing is a complicated process, and it's a heavily detailed process on the city side, on the state side, and the city, the county, and the state all work together through this process. So this is kind of a lengthy slide here, but I wanted to show you this is strictly from the state codified law for tax increment financing. These costs that within the project plan are eligible to be reimbursed. So capital costs, that's the actual cost of your public improvement. That's your roads, that's your water, that's your sewer, that's your grading. Financing costs, so bank financing costs, the interest that a developer is paying on their bank loan is reimbursable. And once again, we track that. So if they put in the project plan, they want to be reimbursed for $1 million in interest. If they have $1 million in one, they're responsible for that $1. We only go up to that $1 million. And that's also tracked on an annual basis of how much interest they're accumulating and what that interest rate is every year. So the real property assembly costs, so land purchases are a TIF eligible cost that can be reimbursable. Professional service costs like architectural planning, your engineering, your attorney fees are eligible. The input and administrative costs, what those are is it's very timely and there is a lot of staff involved. I'm kind of a quasi-member of a lot of departments in this city with Public Works, Engineering, the city attorney's office, if I'm working with the fire department or the police department on projects. So it's very timely, and there's a lot of staff members involved, and it gets costly. So the city does charge a $25,000 imputed administrative cost, and the county has a $15,000 administrative cost. Even though this is a city TIF within the city boundaries, the city does work. The city on it, or the county collects the increment each year and distributes it to the city, that distributes it to wherever bank may hold that note. The city does, or the county does put a lot of effort. They help certify the base value, and then on an annual basis, when the improvements of what these projects are worth. So there is a lot of work in the county side too, so they do get the administrative or imputed administrative costs as well. So relocation costs, organizational costs, like environmental impacts. So that's, once again, let's just say at a gas station, to use an example, removing gas tanks that may have some spillage. Those costs, to clean that all up, is a reimbursable expense. And then lastly, the payments and grants. Now, grant, I want to touch a little bit more detail on that. What is a grant? So before I started working here, I think, let's just say a developer within the project plan, the city council approved a $1 million grant. So before I started working here, I think you apply for a grant, city cuts you a check for $1 million, you don't have to repay that. That's not true. So what a grant is, it's an actual project cost, and it helps, the city council has this at their discretion to help facilitate the components of a project plan. So let's say XYZ business wants to come into town, they're providing 100 jobs, and let's say these are all six-figure jobs. That's very important to the community to have to business in town. We really want this business here. We want them to come. So the city council has discretion to say, we're going to give you a $500,000 grant but it's got to be spent on bringing that business here for infrastructure costs or getting this office space up or retail space to get that up. It's still a project cost. I still collect invoices on those, that $1 million went to. The developer still has to go out and get that $1 million bank loan because that fund is up front. It's not the city writing anybody a check. The city doesn't have that, to be doing that. So it's the city, it's still a project cost, that their money is up front. It's just reimbursable. It's going to pay back that bank loan.
All right, some of the common questions that we have been receiving over the past several months. Number one, can't the money from the TIF be used for other projects in the city? So we often hear, this TIF was approved at $20 million. How about you use the $20 million instead to improve schools or repave a road or whatever that happens to be? That really is impossible because, number one, the city isn't actually spending that $20 million. I mean, whatever that TIF amount is, that's a loan that the developer is getting. So it's not coming out of the city's pocket. Additionally, that money's only available because there's new development that's occurring. And so unless you have that new development occurring, creating the new future tax revenue, there's not actually any money to pay that back. And so it's not that it's one or the other. The city's not cutting back on spending money or investing money over here to instead give it to this developer. Instead, the city's saying, okay, developer, if you actually create $5 million worth of new property tax revenue a year, you can use that for a little bit to help pay some of the costs that are needed to actually start that project. So it's not the city cutting existing programs or existing investments and redirecting those funds towards a new private development. If the TIF fails, who's on the hook? That really is a significant concern, and it definitely should be. Because again, this is not always the case. When you look, as Mike said, when you look across the country, there are different states where when TIFs fail, the city's on the hook for it. That's not what happens in South Dakota. So if for some reason there's not enough assessed value to repay the TIF loans, the developer needs to deal with that. And the developer is going to have to write a check to the bank or whoever they got the loan from. It's not the city that is guaranteeing that loan. And again, that's different than in other states. And so that is why it's important that just because there's something called tax increment financing. If that's tax increment financing in Illinois or Connecticut or Indiana or anything else, it's not apples to apples. Even though the name's the same, it's entirely different. Kind of like the legislative process in Illinois versus the legislative process in South Dakota. Entirely different. They come up with different budgets, they come up with different spending priorities, they go through different processes. It's the same thing as tax increment financing. Also, we've heard Rapid City makes up half the TIFs that are going on right now in the state. That's not true either. If you look, in fact, Rapid City's population is about 9% of the state's total population. Yet our active state or our active TIFs here make up about 8% of the state's active TIFs. So we're not even at average across the state. And so there are plenty of cities that have more TIFs, active TIFs than Rapid City. There's a lot of small cities and a lot of very small counties that have 2 or 3 active TIFs, and that's because they're trying to grow. They're trying to expand their tax basis, and that's good for them. But in doing so, they're making use of TIFs. Will a TIF increase your property taxes? A TIF does not increase your property taxes. Your city mill levy is not going to change. Your county mill levy is not going to change because a TIF is approved. Instead, what's happening is the city is trying to encourage some additional development or this new project to occur so that new sales taxes come into the community, new jobs, new affordable housing, or the overall tax basis is increasing. The idea is that the council or the county commission, if they approve a TIF, they're trying to grow the economic pie. They're trying to broaden the tax basis so that the cost of government is paid by more people or more properties. It's a long-term way to reduce property taxes. If you don't have that new source of revenue in a community, then the increasing costs of government are going to be paid by the same people and the same properties, which means your property taxes go up. Instead, it's city councils and county commissions trying to say, we want more valuable property in our community to help pay those property taxes so we don't have to increase property taxes. The schools lose money. As Mike said, there's a state formula to ensure that schools are essentially made whole through TIF processes. This is an interesting chart that comes from the state. This shows the number of active TIFs that have been approved. And you can see that really starting in about 2020, the number of TIFs approved really started to increase. There are 2 main drivers for that. One is that starting in about 2020, South Dakota became a lot more desirable for a lot of people to move here. And that's not just residences, that's also businesses. So the number of industrial parks, the number of commercial centers, the number of office buildings, the number of residential properties all started to increase dramatically starting in 2020. And so because the rate of growth increased, the rate of TIFs across the state increased, because that, again, is the primary economic development tool that's available to help facilitate that sort of development. But also what happened in 2021 especially, everyone knows, is that the cost of inflation really, or the rate of inflation really picked up. And so the cost of building the infrastructure necessary to start these new developments increased far more than what you could possibly pay off from selling the homes or selling the businesses or whatever that was being developed. And so the gap between what a developer could charge and what it cost to construct started to widen. And so that required more and more TIFs. So you saw the number of TIFs increase statewide dramatically starting in about 2020, 2021. And then also, these are the top 10 counties and their use of TIFs. And I think what's important to remember is that this is counties, so it's not just the city. So when you look at the area here for Pennington County, this is the area for Pennington County. When you look at that, it's not all Rapid City. Pennington County itself has TIFs. So does Box Elder, so does Hill City, and so does Rapid City. But when you look at the number of active TIFs, Pennington County is probably 3rd or 4th in the state. So again, we're not the biggest users of TIFs. We were some of the early adopters of TIFs, and so we've been averaging about 25 TIFs, I think, every decade that we've been doing it. And there were a lot of cities and a lot of counties that just started using TIFs over the past 10 years. So our TIF number is higher, but as far as the active number of TIFs, we're not even close to, or we're not even at the statewide average. In fact, you can look at Aberdeen, Watertown, all of those communities have more than we do per capita. Also, the Rapid City TIF policy, again, we go above and beyond what the state does in TIFs, ensuring that they're actually enhancing our community, enhancing our tax basis, bringing in more jobs, bringing in more sales tax revenue, because the idea behind that is we're trying to broaden the tax basis so that long term our property taxes are stable and not increasing, and that we're bringing in new sales tax revenue as a community. Because again, if we don't bring in new sales tax revenue, the number of capital improvement projects we do is going to decrease, and the cost of providing general ongoing maintenance is going to increase, and that's going to be paid for by our existing property taxpayers. Also, will the TIF affect school funding? No, the state does. Again, they have a formula that backfills the schools, so the schools are made whole. Will your taxes go up because of a TIF district? Your taxes don't go up because there's a TIF district. Instead, your taxes go up because the value of your property goes up. And so one way to combat that is to, when there's higher demand for housing, increase the supply of housing, so that the valuation doesn't spike like it has been, and also to reduce the total requests that go into the property taxes. So if as a city we have more ability, or we have additional revenue streams like sales tax, we don't have to request as much through property tax. TIF classifications, there's local, industrial, economic development, and affordable housing. The important thing is, if it's one of these bottom three categories, the schools are made whole via statewide formula. If it's the top category, local, then the school is made whole through the properties that are within the district. So that could increase it would increase the school mill levy within that district. That is why the city really avoids local TIF districts, because we do not want to see property taxes increase. So when you see, when we pass, TIF districts are almost always going to be industrial, economic development, or affordable housing, because we're not trying to increase property taxes. We're trying to long-term reduce our dependence on property tax. Affordable housing, we've kind of gone over that, and local TIF districts we went over as well. So with that being said, are there any questions or comments? Yes. Sorry, could we just ask you to go up there? I'm sorry.
So my name is Brian Filer, and I had a question for
Mike or Daniel?
Mike. Sorry.
That's right.
So you said something about an undeveloped chunk of ground, and perhaps the TIF got rejected on that when you're talking about the but-for. And you said something, well, it could take possibly 100 years for that to be developed. Do you have any study that says it could take possibly 100 years? Could it take possibly 6 months or a year?
That's just, it could take 6 months, it could take 6 years,
Right.
it could take, there's no study behind it. It's just saying that, just using the two, there was a senior affordable housing project that was denied at the Planning Commission, so that didn't move forward. And so that developer said, we're not gonna move forward with the project, and so that piece of property is sitting vacant to this day, and they have no plans to move forward.
But it is true,
So-
another developer could come in and say, I'm gonna build some sort of store here, or a convenience store, or something like that, and that could happen too, so.
It could. I think the idea between those two projects, one, the affordable senior housing, that is a parcel that has been vacant for, I think, a half century or more, and producing almost nothing in property tax for the school, for the county, for the city. That developer actually had tax credits from the federal government as well as some additional financing from the state. So in order to make something financially possible to actually bring construction to that site, there needed to be a TIF to really fill that gap. When the TIF was not approved, that gap still remained. There were no other sources available to fill that gap, and so the project went away. And so it is true that possibly there could be development on that site in the next year. Over the past several decades, it hasn't happened. So it's difficult to believe that that would change next year when it hasn't changed in the previous several decades.
But that's one particular TIF. We're not lumping all TIFs into that, so.
No,
Right,
but
so.
I think the history of the but-for is that if you look at the TIFs that have not been approved in Rapid City over the past 24 months, those TIFs, when they were not approved, the projects didn't proceed. And so there seems to be a good history that when TIFs are not approved, then the projects don't proceed. And so there's also a gamble that if a TIF is not approved, the project is not going to proceed. There's been a good history of that occurring.
It could be an example that maybe that just wasn't a very good project, and without the extra money, it wouldn't have happened anyway, so.
Yeah, a lot of times those sites are more difficult, and so without some sort of incentive, the sites are going to remain vacant.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening. Mike Derby, State Representative, District 34. Want to go back to the question of if a TIF fails, who's on the hook? And just this week, I had a meeting with a developer that did developed a previous tax increment district, and he was very emphatic. Not only does the developer get the bank loan, but he really wanted to remind me that he had to do a personal guarantee on that. And I'm assuming it depends on the bank you bank with, but my question is, are personal guarantees a normal course of this process?
Yes. They are a typical requirement for any bank or any institution that's going to provide several millions of dollars, or even if it's hundreds of thousands of dollars for a project. They have to provide a corporate guarantee as well as a personal guarantee, because the bank's not going to be left on the hook. And again, that is something that makes TIF districts in South Dakota unique from other states, where that truly is a responsibility of the developer. There are other states where that's not always the case. And so a lot of times when you hear some of the horror stories of TIFs, again, that's other states where they have different processes. But yeah, developers sometimes have to end up writing a check, but that's the risk that they take when they do that private development. Okay.
My name is Janice Evans, and I've seen signs around town about the sports complex being on, or for the vote for January 20th. And I talked with Mr. Ainsley, and he said that if the TIF stuff for the Liberty Land doesn't go through, then the sports complex may not get built, if that's my understanding. And is the sports complex going to be a tax generating property? Does the city own it? I don't
Sure.
understand that part.
Sure. And so, and thank you. I think those are great questions. So there's infrastructure that Liberty Land will end up constructing. That's part of their TIF that would otherwise have to be paid for by the sports complex. And so if the Liberty Land TIF is not approved and Liberty Land doesn't proceed, then that additional infrastructure costs exceeds $10 million that would have to be paid for by the sports complex. And that's what I was trying to refer to, and so I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that. So the Liberty Land TIF does not provide funding for the structure itself, but it does provide funding for some of the utilities and the streets that surround it that would be otherwise the responsibility of the sports complex to end up paying for. The sports complex would be owned by the city. It likely would not be operated by the city. And so the city is right now looking for requests for proposals for a management company. So if anyone's interested, please look into that. But it would be owned by the city, so the property would not be taxed. However, the activities that would occur there would be taxed. And so when you look at sports tournaments and you end up having 50, 60, volleyball teams come or soccer teams come, and they each have 10, 15, 20 kids, the hotel nights that those are generating, the going out to eat, the parents that stop at Rushmore Crossing and do some shopping on Sunday before they head home, or when people end up going downtown afterwards on Saturday night, all of that activity is tourism-related activity and is taxed. And so the sports complex itself would not be taxable, but it would induce new taxable activity. So it would bring new tourists to the community who would invest in our community and generate new sales tax revenue. Yeah, absolutely.
So if the sports complex needed $10 million for this infrastructure that they're going to get from Liberty Land, why didn't they just put that in the catalyst TIF? And why is it that there is no mention of a sports complex at all in the Liberty Land TIF plan? So, thanks.
Sure. It was not included in the catalyst district because there was not sufficient revenue to pay for that. And so the revenue that the catalyst district was able to generate was being used for the structure of the sports complex. And that's not all of it. There's other revenue streams that go into that. The hotels actually have asked for, and the council agreed, to allow them to charge an additional $2 per occupied night per room. And that revenue is going to help pay for the construction of the sports complex, because the council wanted to ensure that the cost of building that sports complex and also operating it did not fall in the general fund. The council didn't. The idea behind this is that it's a great amenity for individuals and families, and it's also an economic driver, but not that it's an ongoing cost to the property taxpayers of Rapid City. They wanted to ensure that that didn't happen. And that's why they used the Catalyst TIF to help pay for it, as well as the hotel, the second hotel bid. And we're looking for sponsorship revenue, as well as new market tax credits and a few other things to make up the difference. But there simply was not enough money available in the Catalyst District to fully pay for all that. What is included in the Destination District TIF plan is that there's going to be improvements made to these roads, and those roads are roads that also surround the sports complex. And so they were designed, and I think everyone, when they heard the discussions during the council meetings and everything else, we even had maps that showed that they go next to each other because there's a synergy between the two uses. And we were trying to make sure that they were able to be built, that the sports complex was able to be built as affordably as possible. And so that's why we tried to make use of the Destination District as well. Any other questions? No? if anyone feels uncomfortable about coming to the microphone or anything else, I'm sure Mike and I will be around for a while. You can talk with us individually afterwards. But other than that, thank you guys very much for coming here, and feel free to ask any questions afterwards if you'd like. Thank you all.